Thank you for listening to the podcast and allowing me to share these incredible stories. You can hear new stories every week on Amazon Music and ad-free for Amazon Prime members. I'm Benjamin Hall, and I'm searching for heroes. Today's guest is someone who has gone to the very bottom, but has fought through and now spends his life helping others who have gone through the same. Jonathan Goyer began using drugs when he was just a teenager, and he was surrounded by people who did. His dad died in 2004 from a heroin overdose, someone that he had been using with. In 2009, his brother died from one as well. But neither of those deaths did little to deter his habit, and Jonathan kept using, dropped out of high school, and ended up on the streets of Providence, Rhode Island, homeless and being arrested again and again. In 2012, having been trying to get clean for a while, he fell off the wagon again and he overdosed. Well, that finally was the last time he used heroin, and it set him on a path not only to recovery, but also to seeking out and helping others around him. Today, we talk about what life was like at the bottom, about family, about how he got over his addiction, and how he then led himself to begin saving others, and also about the opioid epidemic that is spreading across the country. Here is my conversation with Jonathan Goyer. I know that you've been an addict for almost half your life, you have said, and pretty bad place. And I wonder if you could start off by telling us how you first became an addict.
Right. I'll say I was born in Rhode Island in the States. My father was somebody who always struggled with addiction, both alcohol and drug addiction. Him and my mother were never fully together. He was sort of kicked out of the house when I was a young child. So I grew up in that single family household, and also with an older brother who struggled not just with substance misuse, but with mental health disorders as well too. At the age of 7, I was introduced to marijuana at a very, very young age.
Who was that? Was that by who?
By my older brother. So the circumstances were that my mother had to work overtime, to support the household. Mm-hmm. And my brother, who was 13 or 14 at the time, babysitting me. And he was introduced to it by his friends. And then eventually it was introduced to me. That was a very, very brief stint of usage, if you will, or exploration with it.
I wonder, there's like a side story here, which I'm curious about. We won't go into much detail, but do you think that marijuana was a stepping stone? Lots of people say that it should be legalized, but do you think that if you hadn't made that first step to marijuana, you wouldn't have ended up on heroin?
I don't know that that's necessarily true. And I have a lot of friends in recovery now, and recovery is a very personal journey for people, and some people go an abstinence pathway. Some people turn to just using marijuana, right? So to anybody that says marijuana is a gateway drug, you could make the argument that it's the gateway back as well, too, right? So, yeah. But I think I was sort of predisposed to easily forming a reliance or a dependency on something that took me outside of myself.
Yeah, and again, I wonder if, we were saying at the beginning whether it is nature or nurture, and I wonder, your father was an addict. I mean, do you think that was, you inherited that? Do you think that was something that in your family you've seen?
I think that's without a doubt that is a component of it, right? That was, an inhibitor, if you will, right? That, but I think I could have had that component and had a bunch of other environmental and social factors be different and not, went down the road that I did. So I did play a part, but again, just one component.
So you began, smoking marijuana. How fast did that evolve into other drugs?
Well, so that at that age, that was a very brief stint, maybe a month or something of usage. But by the age of 12, I was reintroduced to that and introduced to other heavier substances, such as LSD, ecstasy, which I'm not even sure if that's around anymore, but and some other substances, and that became more of social settings with more of my peers, friends, and things of that nature. And that went on. That went on for a few years. Going to school, but partying on the weekends, if you will. Right.
Of all of your friends in that group that you were sort of taking these drugs with, how many? Because then you were almost living a similar life. How many went on to become full blown addicts, and how many was it just like a high school thing?
I would say not many. Not everybody had my story for sure. I would say 20% or less really migrated towards a severe problematic use.
That's a lot. That's still a lot. Like 20%.
Right. Right. And it impacts people differently. So, when you talk about, like, a lot of people use drugs, legal, illegal, and they use it for recreational purposes, for relaxation, what have you. But the line is, where does it become problematic? Right. And that's something that, sometimes it can be defined by the external forces around us, right? Our boss saying, if you come in late one more time, you're fired, or your wife saying, I'm going to take the kids and go, right? So there are some indicators of external factors that can help to identify when problematic use occurs, but largely it occurs I think initially internally within us, right? When we feel like we're doing something wrong, like this isn't working for us. And I got my first taste of that when I really began, probably around the age of 15 or 16, noticing that I began exchanging or sacrificing things that meant something to me for the getting and using, drugs and alcohol. For example, I love the outdoors. I love camping. And I can remember being around that age, 15 or 16, of my friends going on a camping trip and me opting not to go on the camping trip so I could stay home and indulge in substance use, right?
So were you, and at this point, is that when perhaps the relationship with your mother also started to break apart? So did you see that disappear?
So the lying, the deceitful behavior, right? The stealing money out of her pocketbook, right? That sort of thing happening parallel with also disengaging from some other family traditions, right? Like not wanting to go to Thanksgiving or Christmas. So there was, although my mother and I will say have always had a wonderful relationship, there was certainly a withdrawal on my end, a disinterest, if you will, in sustaining that relationship or continuing to build a healthy relationship with my mother as I grew older. And so not just my mother, by the way, with everybody.
Yeah. And so this just sort of continued to get worse. And then at what age did you reach sort of the lowest point, the worst of it? And what did that look like?
There are so many low points.
Do you remember them all? I mean, I'm not sure, like when you are high or an addict, do you remember the lows?
I mean, a few stand out to me, right? And it's funny, by the way, as somebody with that addictness about them, our brains are almost, positioned or always pivot to remember the good times, right? And not the bad times, right? That's sometimes the problem of what perpetuates, continued problematic use. But
the gamblers will remember the one win.
Right. No,
yeah.
No, and then you chase that, right?
Right.
They'll actually forget the 99 losses, right? And just hone in on that win. So some of the low points for me, dropping out of high school. I dropped out of 10th grade of high school. So there was that. So let's see. By the
time, were you still living at home at that point? Like, was your mother still allowing you to live there, or did you become homeless? Did you end up on the streets?
So I opted to move in with my father at the age of 16 or 17, who was currently a heavy user of heavier drugs. So, by the way, at this point, I've been introduced to heroin, cocaine, crack, and that's become normalized in my life, the usage of those substances.
Was your father providing you with drugs as well?
So he was, and I'll talk a little bit about him in a bit. It took me until I was in recovery to understand that when he used drugs with me and around me, that was a form of neglect. And neglect is a form of abuse. It actually took me a lot of work on myself to understand that, because I loved my father. He could do no wrong in my eyes, right? I think for him, he saw me beginning to use heavily on my own. And in his warped, addicted mind, he thought, well, if I'm using with him, I'm safe. If he's getting the drugs, he knows that they're, not tainted or that perhaps safer. So for me, I fully believe that he was doing the best he could with what he had in the circumstances he was in. But it led to us using heavily together.
A quick step back. What sort of community were you living in? Like what sort of jobs, say, did your mother have? What was it?
So my mother was a CNA, nursing, certified nursing assistant. My father always had businesses of his own that when he was sober did really, really well with. And when he was not sober, did not do well, did not do well at all. But by the age of 17, my father had gotten arrested one day and shoplifting, because that had become a normal part of our routine to find ways and means to get more drugs, was resorting to stealing, lying, cheating, etc.
The two of you together, you and your dad, would sometimes go out and do that. Yeah?
Correct. To me, as a young 17-year-old, I kind of thought it was fun. Dad was going out and doing it, and we had a lot of laughs. It was a good time. It was wrong, and I think I knew in my heart that it was wrong. But I really admired him and looked up to him, and was, he would talk every day. He would talk about, one day we're going to get out of this, right? One day we're going to go and do good. And he was, he was an incredible man who would give the shirt off his back to anybody. But also, much like myself, that I probably get from him, very, very sensitive, right? Just a very, guy.
And I want to get to that, because I really want to talk about resilience and recovery. But is that something that all the addicts you were around at the bottom, did you all say, we want out of, we will get out of this, we want to get out of this? Is that a drive in all addicts?
I think for more often than not, yes. Right now, you're not walking around, 24 hours a day in the mindset of that, right? But I think anybody who is really in the depths of active addiction, whether it's 5 minutes a day or 3 hours a day, you're thinking that you want to get out of it. But it's equivalent to, getting on a bus and you're not driving it, right? You're sitting in the back seat and you're watching somebody else drive the bus. You're watching somebody else take over your life and take the left turns and the right turns. And you're just watching the movie. You're not really in control of all of your actions at that point. So fast forwarding a bit, my father got arrested one day for shoplifting, one of his many arrests. And he went to jail for prison for a 2 or 3 month period, which left me to have to fend, on my own, which I did. I continued my addiction. When he got out of jail, he had nowhere to go. We were both effectively homeless at that point. I had gone back to live with my mother. My mother allowed him to move in upon release from prison. And what happened is he picked up using immediately heroin again. And he began using just as he was 3 months prior. The problem is his tolerance level had decreased. And he experienced a fatal overdose just days after coming out of prison.
I'm sorry. I'm really sorry to hear that. And I wonder, after 3 months of being clean inside prison, why the first thing he wanted to do was get back to the drugs. That sounds like an opportunity. You're clear. And again, part of another idea I want to talk about isn't prison a way of getting clean? Isn't that a great way of moving forward? Shouldn't that give you a real stepping stone to get out of it? And so why didn't that happen?
Well, I don't have that exact answer, but I mean, I've got some theories, not just from him, but other people that I've spent some time with. You know, what you're talking about is recovery from the physical sense. You get put in a jail cell for 90 days. Your body will physically recover, right? The human body alone. And, you know, you can attest to this as well, too, how quickly the human body can physically recover. But there's no mental, emotional, or spiritual recovery happening in that cell. Or perhaps very little, right? Depends on what facility you're in, if they offer, you know, rehabilitation programming and things of that nature. But I believe that my father was not able to heal or begin the recovery process emotionally and spiritually. And that was sort of the easy way out, right?
Yeah.
I don't think he had intended to overdose, but that is what happened. And I'll tell you, let me tell you another low point. In retrospect, the day that he passed away, he had stolen some money from my mother that I was aware of, and he went off to purchase heroin. So I was at home sitting, waiting for him to return, and he didn't return. Now I'm actually like angry at him, right? Because he was supposed to come back with some for me, right? We got the call about 2 or 3 days later, you know, from the coroner's office. I was so in the grips of active addiction that the first thought, instinctual thought that popped in my head when we got that phone call was that we've got to get down to the medical examiner's office to pick up his stuff because there's probably still money in his wallet that I need to go buy more drugs with.
Yeah, that it's remarkable. I mean, I would have thought Dad's died of an overdose. This is going to happen to me. I've got to stop. This is the thing to change me. Right. No, it's the complete opposite, because I was, you know, you have the blinders on. That's all, that's really all you see when you are in the grips. I'm not talking about somebody who dabbles here and there. I'm talking about somebody who's full blown in the grips of active addiction. Everything that comes across your radar, you know, is like, you know, does this present an opportunity to get more drugs? Will this amount to money to get more drugs? Everything is either goes in the get drugs or useless category. You know, that's sort of the operational mindset that I was in anyway. And I think a lot of other people do as well. So you continued using. I mean, where was the process where you built up to the lowest, at which point you started to change?
There's a few more chapters in between here and there, but, fast forward, I eventually, I very soon after left, my mother's house, was homeless on the street. I did that for a year or two. And when I turned 18, I began going in and out of, detox facilities. As a juvenile, you're not offered, not often a lot of resources for teenagers, but once you turn that 18 and become an adult, I could start doing that. I could also sleep in the homeless shelters too. I can remember being 17 years old and being turned away from homeless shelters because I was not 18. I was not an adult. So for me, I was like, oh, I'm 18. They're all, it opened up a world of resources for me. Well, that started the sort of in and out of detoxification facilities, where you'd go in for 5, 7, or 10 days, physically withdraw. They'd medicate you to get you feeling better and try to offer you, a referral to the next level of care. Unfortunately, I would often not take that level of care. And we have a term for it in the recovery field. We call it a spin dry. You go into detox, you get sober for 5 or 6 days, you put on 30 pounds, and you go back to the streets and go back using. That occurred for a period of time.
But you wanted to stop. I mean, so there was something already that was making you say it wasn't working, because I think maybe there wasn't the aftercare, but you kept going to stop. There was something inside you saying, I need to stop this.
Correct. The flame was there. It was dim, but the flame of hope was there a little bit. But I'll tell you, having had already been through so much, as a teenager up until the age of 18, when the drugs start wearing off and you're sitting there and your feelings come back and your realization of all the things that you've done wrong, the people you've lost, in my circumstance, having to actually look at the fact that my father had passed away, feeling bad about the money you stole, the people you lied to, the shame, the remorse, the guilt. Boy, that really just, you turn the corner, you physically get well, and you turn the corner and you are just overwhelmed with all of that.
And you can mask all of that. You can get rid of all of that sort of worry and anxiety or regret by getting back on the drugs.
Well, right. And think about it. If let's say that you're, $10,000, $20,000 in debt, right? And you've got all of these people that you've lied to, that you need to face. You're unemployable. You have nowhere to live. Would you rather face all those problems or just try to find $20 and make it go away, right? What's the easier way in that, right? So I think that's a lot of people don't have that, as we were talking, recovery capital or social capital, or just that strong enough willpower, even if you will, to climb that mountain today.
More of our conversation right after this.
So my story is at the age of 19, I did find recovery. I went into a residential treatment center, and I did start my journey of recovery. And I was able to get 2 years sober, and did really, really well. Did really, really well for myself. Had a good job. And at that age, when you get sober at that age, you're learning everything, right? Like, I hadn't even had my first car yet. I was still learning how to do my own laundry, right? All of life was new to me. But unfortunately, after 2 years thinking I had figured it out, right? And forgetting about how serious and scary addiction can be, I eventually did pick up using drugs again, and immediately lost everything that I had that I built up in that 2 year time.
I wonder, how long were you then addicted at that point?
About 3 years. And that 3 year period was really, really, really rough. So we're talking between the ages of 22 to 25 or so. In the beginning of that period of using again, I had reconnected paths with my brother, who again was 7 years older than me, and he was always struggling on and off with substance misuse and diagnosed bipolar, schizophrenic, other mental health conditions. But we had began using together, and there was that one fateful day where he also experienced a fatal drug overdose.
Goodness. Where were you? Were you there at the time?
I was with him that day. And so let me tell you that. So at the age of 22, now losing my brother, I had lost my father at 17. And I had also just recently lost my job. All of that stuff I had in recovery. You want to talk about an identity crisis. I went, I was homeless, kind of walking around downtown city, feeling like I had really lost everything. Because it's interesting when we when somebody asks you, who are you, or how do you identify who you are as a person? Our first things are maybe your job, right? Maybe your work, your family, your significant other, your home. And so when you lose all of that in a really relatively short amount of time, where does that leave you? And I don't mean lost, it's one thing you lose a house, you can get another house, but when you're losing family members and you're really losing a part of yourself, really tough to come back from, really tough to reestablish yourself, if you will.
So then, but not even that stopped you either. The loss of two family members.
No, that was a reason to continue using. It's quite the opposite. I fully understand what you say when you think, well, you would one might think that would be a motivation to turn your life around. But that's that thought process, that framework of thinking is from the perspective of a healthy person.
Yeah. Okay. So what was it? What finally helped you turn the corner?
So at the age of 25, I had been to 38 treatment centers, 38 different treatment centers. So you had said at the beginning of our talking today, you said, I believe everybody else gets a second chance. I got 38 chances. So I think sometimes it takes more than two, and that's okay.
But that doesn't say much about the recovery treatment or these centers. I mean, if 38 times hasn't helped, then there's a big problem there.
Well, I'll tell you this. When I walked into a treatment facility for the 21st time, for the 23rd time, for the 33rd time, the people that greeted me at the door loved me until I could learn how to love myself. Those were some of the only positive, compassionate, real conversations I was having in my life. So although I may have made the decision to leave those facilities prematurely and not take advice, left against medical, advice, etc. Those times were some of the only conversations keeping me going, keeping that flame of hope alive. So I do attribute that some of my kind of internal motivation to that, because when I would go to those facilities, they would tell me, you deserve a better life. You can get out of this. You're still young. You've got a lot of life ahead of you. And that was the only time I was getting that message, because on the street corner, and talking with drug dealers and this and that, you don't always hear that. Yeah, they're not as motivational.
Yeah. And I presume that is the message that you are now passing on to everyone else. I mean, you are taking what happened to you, what changed you, and you're trying to give it to others.
Right. And it's, for somebody, that's the gift that somebody in recovery has. So in my previous work, I've worked in the field now for over 10 years. Anchor Recovery, I'd worked at for 5 years doing peer recovery support work, and moved on to many, many other things. It's when you're in recovery, you get this natural gift. You inherit this gift of profoundly understanding that anybody can recover, right? Anybody, because it's the old, if I can do it, you can do it thing, right? And the levels of compassion and empathy, the capacity that's grown within me of those things has been unparalleled to anything imaginable.
So that's community. It was being part of a community that really gave you the strength to do that.
Yes, and that's a large component of it, right? For sure. But I did, so fast forward, I did end up getting arrested a couple of times. I'm entangled with the law, if you will. And I'll tell you just about my worst point. Was at the age of 25. I had 3 warrants out for my arrest for pretty significant felony charges. 3 different warrants out for my arrest. I was about $80,000 in debt. I was no longer welcome in my family members' homes. I was homeless. I was doing, whatever it is I had to do to get money every day to get a fix, to acquire more drugs. I was unemployable. I definitely was undateable, right? There was nobody, that ship sailed years prior. And I had about one change of clothes on my back, all of which were tattered and torn and bloody. And I was still reeling from the loss, of family and other things. So that was just about my worst low point.
Yeah, or sounds about as low as you can get, but you still had that small flame of hope inside you. That was all you had left. You had nothing else but that.
Right. And it's, it's the flame of hope, right? And I'll say on most days, I wanted to get sober. I wanted to want to do better, but I wasn't always there. It was like once removed from the feeling, almost like observing the feeling, but not experiencing the feeling.
So that was the lowest. And was that the point at which you wanted to change?
No. You asked me on this podcast. No. So I had gone to prison. I spent about 4 months or so, which was actually a bargain for everything that I all the charges I had amassed.
What were you in for?
Felony, everything from embezzlement to fraudulent prescriptions to heroin possession to hit and runs with cars, stolen cars, police chases. Quite a record. 17 felonies. Mm-hmm. So I'd gone to prison. I got released to treatment, and I felt it that time. I felt it like this is going to be, I just felt better. I was actually able to quickly reconnect with some people that I had met in recovery during my 2-year stint of recovery. I started drawing on those social capital resources, those recovery capital resources. And I did really well. I graduated a 90-day residential treatment center, and I went to go live in a recovery house, or some people might call them sober houses or halfway houses. In that house, there was one day where I was really struggling mentally. I was sober, but it was so hard. I was trying to find a job. I was struggling to find a job. Nobody wants to hire somebody with, such a felony, record, in addition to not having a very good resume the last 10 years prior. Right. And I threw the towel in. I went and I bought heroin and I used it, and I overdosed immediately. Thank God I was in a place where somebody had Narcan, and they administered Narcan, which is a medication used to reverse an opioid overdose. And I was saved. My life was saved. That was the point, having actually died and came back to life, that I realized the party was over, right? Get busy living or get busy dying. This is it. This is the life I had. I made an absolute mess out of it. Still in a ton of debt, still needing to sort out some legal issues, unstably housed at that, point. But this is it. This is what I've got, and I've got to either take it and make the best of it, or I'm not going to have, at least I have that opportunity. So either have the opportunity or don't have the opportunity, because it's, again, get busy living or get busy dying. And that was the point for me. So I slowly began the very, very long road to recovery.
I just wonder, what could have been in place if you'd been able to find a job sooner, if you had, I don't know, been surrounded by a longer recovery or sober house? Like what would have really helped that wasn't there that you think is lacking right now?
Well, everybody's circumstances are different, right? And it's interesting because everybody's trying to recover something different, right? And that is because addiction took something different from everybody. Sure, there are a lot of similarities. People lost their job, they lost their kids, or maybe they lost family members to overdose. But internally, what that did to us, addiction takes something a little bit different from everybody, and it impacts everybody differently. So you've got to look at what is it that you're trying to recover, right? So with that said, it's hard to think of a universal set of resources that would help individuals. But having worked on the front lines of this addiction epidemic now for a decade, and worked for everything from advocating for legislation, different policies, practices, starting programs, all of that. At the end of the day, there's no system. There's really not even a systematic change that's going to occur that's going to cure addiction, right? To me, it's about recovery, and it's about community, as you had said. One of my favorite lines is empathy is the language of recovery. When people are in active addiction and they're doing negative behaviors, that scares people, right? And a lot of people respond to that with a fear-based mentality. And that comes out in various policies. It comes out in different procedures. It comes out in what's socially acceptable, right? Maybe it's employers not hiring somebody with a felony record. Maybe it's a landlord not renting to somebody because they have a drug charge from 6 years ago, because it's that fear. But understanding that, trying to develop empathy and understand that we're all human, we all make mistakes, and believing that we're all here trying to do the best that we can.
Yeah. It's funny because I can easily understand when you drive through a city street and you see someone, an addict curled up in a corner. Part of you thinks we've got to help that guy, save the guy, but the other half of you thinks there's a criminal over there who's making the streets dirty.
Right.
Taxpayers' money has gone to that. Like, the law should be stepping in to stop him. And, immediately that person becomes a villain. And, I guess that's what's so hard for people to help when it comes to recovery is how do you, because I think maybe there is, and I don't know if you think maybe there is some blame on the person, or maybe the family wasn't there at the beginning. And it's a really difficult one to square up in terms of what the community can do to just go and you can't just go and embrace everyone, because I think does there not need to be some ramifications for having taken that path down there? Well, so how do you balance those two feelings?
We know that there's a shortage of treatment beds for addiction right now. We know that the capacity for various levels of care, whether it's somebody wanting to talk to an outpatient counselor for their substance misuse, or somebody needing a really high level residential, treatment facility, we're lacking in treatment capacity. Yes, somebody said, you know what? I'll take that pill. I'm having a good time. Nobody intended for it to become the vagrant criminal curled up on the street corner. That's just where it went. But because we don't have the response, the empathetic, compassionate, logical, data-driven, resourceful response to the addiction epidemic, I fear I don't know if we'll ever truly get ahead of it.
We'll be back in a moment with Searching for Heroes. Talk to me a little bit about what you now do. You walk the streets. You go out and try and save people who are out there. So you are on the other, you're in the other place. What are you saying to them? How are you now trying to take what you learned and pass that on?
Right. So in terms of mobile outreach work, which is so huge, I've done that for many, many years, and from a professional standpoint of going out and engaging people on the street, engaging the guy curled up in the corner, as you say. And it's about building that rapport with them, educating them on the resources they have, helping to sit down and assess what their situation actually is, right? A lot of people that are become, homeless and so off the grid, perhaps they need help getting health insurance that'll pay for treatment, right? So just helping to assess their situation and remind them really on a daily basis what the options are that they have. But also, just treating them like human beings, right? Like just, getting them a meal if they need a meal, having a conversation with them, having a normal conversation with them, and keeping that flame of hope alive for them. And, everybody, we had talked about this a little bit earlier, but I call it a window of willingness, right? Anybody who has been in the throes of active addiction has experienced windows of willingness where they did get in the driver's seat for 1 second of their body and of their mind and said, I've got to do something, and I'm willing to do something right now. And it might just be a fleeting thing, right? It might be a 10 or 15 minute window that this willingness appears for. But making sure that people have the right resources at hand, the accessible resources to act on that when that window of willingness opens is huge.
Are you just speaking to people out on the streets? And as you said, the physical recovery is possible, but right. The mental recovery is a lot harder. So, yes, you're out there, you're saying, come in, like, let's get you off this. But how do you help them in the longer term? Because that seems to be the harder part.
Right. Well, so you're talking about my engagement with people throughout the spectrum of their recovery. It's not logical. You can't walk up to somebody who's in heroin withdrawal on a street corner and say, I'd like to give you a job. So on that street level, just getting them into to engage with some form of treatment, some level of care, right? And by the way, I have people call me all the time. Maybe it's a parent saying, my son's addicted. He needs help. What's the best treatment facility that I can send him to, right? We want to do our best for our loved ones. What's the best thing to send them to? The best treatment option for somebody struggling with addiction is the one that they're willing to engage with at any point in time. That is the best option. But moving down the spectrum, I think one of the best things that I've been able to do for people in their recovery is employment. I've been able to work my way up throughout a number of organizations and hire people who are in recovery, maybe people that have previous felony records and things of that nature. One of my taglines is, your rap sheet is our resume, and people with lived experience and help them along that way, right? And people, it's the same way people continue to help me in recovery. I had a friend 5 years ago that convinced me I should buy a house. And I did. Isn't that crazy? How crazy is that? For somebody that so had nothing, the thought of me being able to buy my own home it was crazy. That's something somebody did for me, in my 5th or 6th year of recovery. Like the gifts just keep coming, right? Like you have to continue to help people along the way. And some people might get a job new in recovery and excel in that. Other people might take a year off from work and just focus on repairing some broken relationships with family and loved ones, right? Yeah. Like there's not a certain chronological segment that has to happen, but it's about getting back what addiction had took from you. So I take great pride in trying to help people all along that process and teach and guide and mentor them and cheerlead them into knowing and believing that the quality of our lives can increase every day in recovery, and every day that our quality of life increases sober. The thought using looks less appealing and less appealing. Right?
Yeah. When you look at the whole spectrum right now, we've got a big opioid crisis at the moment. Do you see things getting better? Or, I mean, the figures are jumping up right now. So are things getting worse?
I mean, depends on what you use for an indicator. But if you were going to go down
the number of people.
The number of people dead, right? If you go down to the medical examiner's office and count the bodies, they're climbing and climbing every day. So it is getting worse for sure. I also think in the economical turbulent times that we're in, that it's harder for people to, to acquire, the resources and stability that they may need, right? Like, I was able to buy a house pre-pandemic levels. Not sure I'd be able to afford one now, right? But I do absolutely think that it's getting worse. But again, I think it would benefit all of us to stop looking at kind of the system to make the changes and ask, what can I do as an individual, right? It's not just the police that are going to fix it, or just the doctors or the medical community or the spiritual clergy community. No, everybody's got a job to do, and it starts at home. It starts having those conversations. It starts with building empathy for those that are struggling. It starts not just in trying to support somebody who's in active addiction, but understanding how active addiction impacts other people, right? You may have a coworker who has a son or daughter in active addiction, and their life, your coworker's life, is impacted on unbelievable levels, right? The rippling effect and impact that active addiction has throughout family members and the community is unbelievable. So asking yourself, how can I support that person, right?
Yeah. I'm a father of three. And, my daughters are still very young. The eldest is 8. But I suppose, and you hear stories of, totally normal families who I know, whose children, you think are doing really well in school and just fall off the opioid crisis. And so what should I be speaking to my children? What should I be looking for? Like, is there something that you think isn't happening? And I would say it's just family, like be a big family bond, eat together, go out together, do things together, encourage hard work, all the normal things. But is there something that isn't happening right now that we should focus on?
I don't know that there's one particular thing, so SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, is a federal agency in America that tackles mental health and addiction. And they define recovery as health, homes, community, and purpose. Now, even with you in your life, if you were to look at those 4 things, your health, home, community, and purpose, if you're keeping those 4 things, filled and progressing and growing and thriving in those areas, you're going to be okay, right? Those are sort of the primary functions of life, if you will. So in terms of, speaking to your daughters, et cetera, I think it's more about monitoring those things. And are people getting enough of each of that category? Are they stable in those areas? Are they thriving in those areas?
Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose that the other side of that is I can provide that to my family, but some people would say that it's the government who needs to be doing more, that it should be taxpayers' money that should be doing more, that they need more systems. And I don't know, I'm always reluctant to say the solution to this is that the government should be spending more of our money providing centers. I mean, I think it should be community and home. I think that's where the core is, really.
Right. I think that's all the only realistic thing that we have more control over, right? To be realistic, you can sit here and wish and wait that something's going to happen. But again, what is your job? What is your role in this? And being proactive and engaging and helping those, community to thrive, right? Helping somebody to find purpose, right? Even with your daughters, for example, ensuring that they feel like they have a purpose here, even at a young age that they might be, and helping to guide them and support them and continuing to explore what their purpose might be.
Yeah, excellent. Jonathan, thank you so much for speaking with us today. Thank you. Yours is an incredible story, really. And I just know that everyone I've spoken to says the same thing. Community, family, what you just laid out, those 4 things, that's it. That's what we got to focus on. It makes us all stronger. So thank you. I'm going to channel that myself.
Excellent. Well, thank you for having me anytime. I appreciate it.
Not at all. And thank you for all the work you do, Jonathan. You keep staying out there, man. You're saving lives.
Thank you.
It was really interesting speaking with Jonathan. And I think on one sense, it's because perhaps I struggle with the fact that it wasn't even the death of his father or the death of his brother that led him to change. And for me personally, I think that's something that would change in a heartbeat. And personally, when I was injured that day in Ukraine, it was family that gave me that absolute strength to push on through. And so it makes me think about a number of things. First of all, the opioid addiction. How terrible can it be that even the deaths of your close family members can't get you off it? But also perhaps it reminds me that maybe resilience isn't found immediately. Maybe you really have to get to the worst place possible. But nevertheless, it may have taken him a few times. He may have got to the very bottom and to the worst part, but he did eventually find resilience. And I guess he found resilience when his own life was at risk. I do sometimes wonder whether some people are born with resilience and other people come across it. I know that when I was injured, the first thought in my mind was, I have to get through this no matter what. And I don't think that I needed to reach that point. I felt that it was already inside me. But with Jonathan and with other people we've spoken to, they needed community, they needed people, they needed a whole team to get through it. So again, it is also a reminder that we have to do these things together. And one of the things that we talk about with every guest so far is parents and family. And I think this is a prime example where father was on drugs that led very clearly into the state that Jonathan found himself in. And again, it is a reminder that it must be the first thing we focus on. It's the first thing that gets us through the hardest moments. And it's also perhaps the most important thing we must do as parents, is to make sure that we are there no matter what, to guide our children, to make sure they don't fall off. Nevertheless, we see the opioid crisis sweeping across America. We have talked to a number of people who are affected, and it is something that needs to be really considered. And I think the people who will help others get through such addiction are addicts themselves. And that's why I think someone like Jonathan is a good voice to listen to. And so I think that, you have to put aside the questions of how terrible his choices were early on and realize that he's turned that around. And that's what this podcast is about, is turning around the bad and making good out of it. So a tribute to Jonathan for doing that and for finding a way out of the darkness, and a reminder that it doesn't matter how bad things get. You can always pull through. And Jonathan showed us that today. Thanks for listening to Searching for Heroes. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcasts Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.